the peculiar surreptitiosity, maybe like in all elective affinities, we could point to certain problems that Nietzsche has and other thinkers have obsessed on. Um, so I'm going to try to look at Heidegger's analysis of Nietzsche, um, especially on honing in on this point that Heidegger's claiming up until his investigation in the 4-volume Nietzsche book, the moment of sort of it was known that Nietzsche had sort of a long development and then an explosion of what's customarily called his mature period in the sort of in the late 1880s, 1888. He produced a bunch of books, and notably some of the famous remarks about the true world and the apparent world, and how the disappearance of the true world doesn't mean that the apparent world has now come to simply be swapped out with it, as though there was number one and number two already interpreted as whole numbers, and would just remove Plato's version of the true world and then put in the essential world or the apparent world in its place, but rather something more decisive was happening at that moment, which then was followed by his mental illness and or his mania, let's say in the Greek way, his mania or madness. It became verrückt. That's interesting. Heidegger says everyone is verrückt, as a basic feature of our Dasein. And at this moment, what's supposed to happen according to Heidegger? So of course we know there's the Aufklärung, or the sort of the philosophe version, the Luminaire's version, French version of the Nietzsche had syphilis, and Nietzsche had been to the whorehouse, and Nietzsche naturally succumbed to this illness, and it showed in some strange Dionysian dithyrambs that he wrote, but that was sort of beside the point. The real point is the biological and shadow casting, experimentally studyable decay of an organism. This sort of put it in 19th century. The phrase of, Dostoevsky talks this way about everything's now being seen as an organism, and the Bezi, or the petty demons. Apparently, Dugan wrote something recently about this. There's four, I may have heard it a long time ago, but I've forgotten it. There's four different types of demons, according to the, I think just in vernacular Russian. I think most Russians know about it. And the Bezi, are the smaller ones, are the sort of furthest from Satan. According to, my spiritual teacher says Satan that doesn't exist anymore, but that he did at one time. So some of his works may still be in operation. But anyway, that's on the aside. But what's going on with this? So Heidegger cites that Nietzsche has spoken of this terrible discord between truth and art, and he leads us into the 10th book of Plato's Republic, where there's one of the versions that Plato gives, apparently in Plato's middle period version, of the problem of the archetype. I'll call it that way. The problem with the idea, or the archetype, and then he gives the example of bed frames, and I think another example also. But in any case, saying the craftsman that knows how to make this, we can't take it that they also invented the archetype. Nor does he say that there could be several archetypes, so that somebody who knows how to make a bed frame may know how to do it in the Dorian style, or in the Ionian style, or in the, some other style. But that rather, ultimately, we have to say that there's only one archetype. But then this is presented. But then he says this all the time, saying, I'm talking about Plato, or is it a teaching that comes from Socrates? That's another problem we have. I would raise also the question of whether Nietzsche has become aimed at becoming an inverted Socrates, all sort of unawares. He tries to, at first he tries to overturn Plato in something as though he were just doing something like Hegel, just putting something on it that is on its head, on its feet, or something like that, or has Marx's claim to do to Marx and Engels' claim to do to Hegel. But then, like I said, this moment where he realized I can't just say this overcoming of this sort of feasting of the eyes on the opposite sex by both the sexes, and the sort of sloppy love fest that follows in the predatory sensual world, would then sort of somehow become the truth. But he says rather, this is the life. One of his formulas again is this is the life-giving lie. But that's again a formula that still relies on sort of the truth, to the world of illusion, and then it doesn't really overcome it. So Heidegger's saying this was the decisive moment right before the madness, and possibly, so the opposite view, the French view, would be once Nietzsche's perspectivalism really clicked into this problem and really got an engagement with it. So we're trying to get just some mild engagement with these problems. That's the main purpose of these avenues that I'm setting out here in words. But remember, your neurologist will tell you that the same neuron or cluster of neurons that can read a name can also, in certain cases, recognize the image or the face of that name, and in other, with other respect to other things. So still we have the problem of dianoia and logos going together with the neurons. The neurons confirm that. And here we would say what is being selectively, electively, and surreptitiously sort of approached as a perspective in the ultimate. So in some case we could say, in a lower case, just to give an example, we could say from the point of view of evolutionary biology, we could signal traits where we could say dogs have selected out certain examples. So for instance, they can recognize sculpture that looks like animals. So they have some neurons that are able to recognize certain features, but then they don't recognize books. I don't think dogs specifically distinguish book from other sort of square object or rectangular objects that look sort of something that looks similar to a book in a book. I don't think the dogs necessarily, if they see that in the work of art, are going to really notice that. That would be a possible perspectival difference. Another would be face blindness. For instance, some people don't really distinguish faces much. That's a perspectival, immediate, experiential version. But say Nietzsche has arranged his engagement with his direct understanding of the old version, which then he presents as belonging to the mistake of the early animal forms of the basically of. So one thing, actually, I have to give a little aside here, I think, because people can correct me, and it would be helpful if I'm wrong about this, but I don't. Maybe I kind of suspect I haven't been thorough enough lately, and also one tends to forget these things. But I don't remember Heidegger placing a lot of emphasis on Nietzsche's study of the modern sciences anywhere. Nietzsche has made an enormous study of all the scientific books available to basically the contemporary ones and the, going back to Roger Bacon or whatever, and not to say Francis Bacon, of course, but and actually that's even worth mentioning itself. Roger Bacon, in the sort of a contemporary of Thomas Aquinas, had studied thoroughly the Arabic sources, and the Arabic sources had gone into the problem of perception in a way that later is associated for us with Descartes. And this is already, I think this is already a creeping version of why the German idealism is inescapable, okay? Because once you get this idea that later becomes the ridiculous notion of the pineal gland, that perception can be accounted for by pointing to mechanical workings in the physical brain. And once you get this notion of that the whole of the world can be perceived, it can be clarified or explained in the terms of saying it's in the terms of what later becomes like analysis of what a camera does, like almost like, one version is pixelation. Oh, that's what's happening, pixelation, and there's a certain amount of refinement you can get in the image, and and then it's as though it's depending on what kind of sand you were using when you made the glass, whether it's quartz crystal clear or whether it's opaque or something, and there's different versions, and then you can try to make an analysis of the basic features of the visual world, which then one can kind of expand to mean the basic features of any sense data. So this whole new thing was creeping in and becoming the main notion of nature, in a way, becoming the part of the essence of the new main notion of nature. So, like, for instance, Heidegger says in this current work, he's saying, what Goethe meant by nature is already different than what contemporaries of Nietzsche meant by nature. And likewise, I guess to give another example, Heidegger also says that Bildung, or education, obviously it's if you look at the word just generically and say education, that exists at all times, at all places, but then you look at the details, paideia with the Greeks, or education with the Americans, rather than the Bildung of Humboldt or something. The Bildung of the current German isn't the same as this program that was dreamed up by Humboldt, of the unlimited sort of free research of the Bildung, or of what the schoolmen thought of their version of education. So it's like so the word in a way tells us more than what any it tells us what the word, what's happening there. We orient ourselves to it in the present, and then even if we look at paideia and our Bildung, which is closer, and try to see what it was really all about, we're somewhat captivated by the sort of analysis of the semantic field. It has a sort of matrix of its own that gives birth to poisons sometimes, or to sweet things at other times. Um, and so we see Nietzsche. Let me sort of revert to one of the after going on into again, what is Nietzsche's elective affinity amount to in the highest sense? Let's forget the perspectivalism for a second, except that in a way this is the deepest moment of perspectivalism, is that he's saying all throughout his life he had this, he's describing it as Heilige Scheu, Scheu, sort of a holy skittishness, or they translate it actually in the that Heidegger, holy dread, but it might mean as well holy shyness in a certain way. I think what is meant is seen, is experienced, and if you look at the autobiography of Malcolm X, when he's talking about Elijah Muhammad, and then he's making a distinction between the fear of a gun and the fear of Elijah Muhammad, and the fear of Elijah Muhammad then is like this holy shyness. I guess it's worthwhile to make this excursion. Like, you could say immediately, so let's look at where we actually exist. So where we actually exist, it makes sense to some people to go into questions like the evolutionary biological view here. So then you'd say of somebody like Elijah Muhammad, who when he was a young man who was doing some kind of physical labor, he was immediately selected out, and he'd say, make this man the manager or the overseer. That happened just naturally, as it were, without him trying to do it. And then, yeah, you could say from an evolutionary biological point of view, yes, there's these different types. There's the type A personality, type B personality. There's different types, and you see them in herds, and it's a matter of herd. So there would be some kind of geometric, as it were, way of encapsulating everything, and then trying to, through Procrustean fixing, make it all fit that model, which, well, I mean, that's what actually exists, right? So that actually exists in the Robert Sapkowski, or the in the most sort of crude and sort of blustering fashion, Richard Dawkins, but in many people. On the other hand, you could analyze the same happening from totally different from a moral point of view or something, because you could say Elijah Muhammad is known to have probably had a lot of sexual misdealings with young girls or something like that. I'm not saying that he was a pedophile, but I'm saying sort of taking advantage of young assistants or something like that. 16, 17-year-olds, something like that. But then one could say this is totally, what does it have to do with the question of the Heilige Scheu? What does it have to do with the fact that he has this awe-inspiring quality? After all, King David committed n number of genocides, slaughtered whole tribes for almost no reason, just to conceal his own crimes. He didn't want to leave any witnesses, and in addition had more than 1,000 wives, something like that, and probably they were 12 or 13 years old. So what does it have to do with being holy? What does it have to do with being the object of this this sort of shy veneration? But for Nietzsche, the object of the shy veneration was this discord, this raging discord, as it's referred to in the translation of Heidegger's Nietzsche book, of the art and the truth. So the truth, again, it's what we were saying about Plato's 10th book. Plato's now using the word theos. That's worth asking. I think the Heretofore is among the earlier works, and the Politeia, or the Republic, is one of the first of the so-called middle Plato, but maybe not, so that he already had developed the Heretofore doctrine, or he had got that from Socrates. That's again another question. Who is being overturned here, Socrates or Plato? They say Plato, and then also Heidegger even says Platonism, in order to say not the true Plato, but some version that Nietzsche happened to attack. And then he makes certain claims about exact moments where Nietzsche is using the Platonism stock concepts rather than actually what we get from confronting Plato. But those are all essentially not that important. What's important is that Nietzsche has this elective affinity towards sort of feasting his eyes and having this sloppy love fest with this problem all of his days. It's obsessing him, and then it's at the end he goes mad and tumbles into it, as it were. But maybe he has got the solution, and even where he hasn't ironed it out, Heidegger is saying that's no excuse for those of us who have inherited the path that he's forged, and maybe we could still work out something worthy